"This is just a shortcut, guys," Alex said confidently, gripping the wheel tighter as the car sped along the narrow, unmarked highway. "We'll make up for lost time." The road trip had started as a cheerful escape from their mundane lives. Alex, Maya, Jordan, and Sam were heading to a remote mountain cabin, eager for a weekend of hiking, laughter, and campfires. But delays caused by roadwork had thrown them off schedule, and the once lively atmosphere in the car had grown tense. Maya, sitting in the back seat, glanced out the window at the dense forest closing in around them. "This doesn't feel right," she said, her voice edged with unease. "Relax," Alex replied, forcing a grin. "It's just a back road. Google Maps says it'll save us an hour." The others exchanged uncertain glances, but said nothing. The road was eerily quiet, flanked by towering trees whose gnarled branches intertwined above them, forming a dark canopy that blotted out the fading sunlight. As they drove deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier. The usual sounds of nature, chirping birds, rustling leaves, were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the hum of the car engine seemed muted. When the gas gauge dipped precariously low, Alex spotted a lone gas station up ahead. The building was decrepit, its sign faded and barely legible. A single flickering bulb illuminated the pumps, casting long, jagged shadows. "Are we seriously stopping here?" Jordan asked, his tone skeptical. "We don't have a choice," Alex said, pulling up to the pump. A hunched figure emerged from the shadows of the station, an elderly attendant with a face etched in deep lines. His hollow eyes darted nervously toward the road behind them. "You folks headed down that highway?" he asked, his voice raspy and low. "Yeah, why?" Alex said, trying to sound casual. The man shook his head slowly. "Turn back. That road ain't for travelers like you." "What does that even mean?" Sam asked, trying to sound amused but failing. The attendant leaned closer, his breath sour and heavy. "It means you've made a mistake." Without another word, he turned and shuffled back into the darkness of the station. The group sat in stunned silence for a moment before Alex forced a laugh. "Creepy old guy. Let's just get moving." As they pulled back onto the highway, the forest seemed to grow denser. The trees pressed closer to the road, their twisted branches clawing at the car as if trying to hold it back. An hour later, things began to unravel. The car's radio, which had been playing a playlist of pop hits, suddenly crackled with static. Sam fiddled with the controls, but the noise only grew louder, interspersed with faint, unintelligible whispers. "What the hell is that?" Maya asked, leaning forward. "It's just interference," Alex said, though his voice was strained. Moments later, the headlights flickered. The road ahead became impossibly dark, as if the shadows themselves were swallowing the light. Alex slowed the car, his eyes scanning the edges of the road. Then they saw it, a figure darting between the trees, too fast and too blurred to make out. "Did you see that?" Jordan whispered, gripping the edge of his seat. "It was probably just an animal," Alex said, though he didn't believe it himself. The whispers from the radio grew louder, more insistent. The words were still unclear, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. Maya reached for her phone, only to find it had no signal. When the rusted sign appeared, they all sighed in relief. "Welcome to Craymore," it read in faded letters. Finally a town. "Help! Safety!" The car rolled into the deserted streets, and the group's relief quickly turned to unease. Craymore looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The buildings were warped and crumbling, their windows shattered. Dust coated every surface, and the air carried a faint, acrid smell of decay. "Where is everyone?" Maya whispered, peering out at the desolate streets. "Maybe we're just in the wrong part of town," Alex suggested, though his hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The car sputtered and stalled. Alex tried to restart it, but the engine refused to cooperate. "Come on," he muttered, slamming the wheel in frustration. "This is bad," Maya said, her voice trembling. Jordan pointed toward a diner with a flickering neon sign. "Let's check that out. Maybe someone in there can help us." The group climbed out of the car, the sound of their footsteps unnervingly loud in the silence. The diner's door creaked open, revealing an interior frozen in time. Plates of rotting food sat untouched on the tables, and a jukebox in the corner emitted a faint hum. "This place is giving me serious creep vibes," Sam muttered, running a hand through his hair. As they explored, they found no signs of life, only an overwhelming sense of wrongness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then they heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and far too close. They spun around, but the diner was empty. "Let's go back to the car," Alex said, his voice low and urgent. But when they stepped outside, the road they had come in on was gone. In its place stood more trees, taller and darker than before, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes. The group stared in disbelief as the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing from the depths of the forest. "What is happening?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide with terror. No one had an answer. Craymore had swallowed them whole. The group stood frozen, staring into the dense forest that now surrounded the town. The road they had driven in on had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable wall of trees that seemed alive, their branches twisting as if in silent mockery. This can't be real," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "It's some kind of illusion or, I don't know, a trick," Alex said, though his confidence was clearly waning. He gripped the car keys in his hand as if they could somehow bring them back to safety. "There's no way this is happening," Sam muttered, pacing in small, frantic circles. "Let's focus," Jordan said, trying to sound calm, but failing. He gestured toward the diner. "We need to find someone who can explain this." The group reluctantly agreed and headed back into the eerie diner. Inside, the air was stifling, and the faint hum of the jukebox seemed louder now, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Hello," Alex called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the empty space. "Is anyone here?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from the back of the diner, a soft creak broke the stillness. Maya grabbed Alex's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "What was that?" she whispered. Alex stepped forward cautiously, leading the group toward the sound. They reached the kitchen, which was a chaotic mess of rusted appliances and overturned chairs. On the counter lay a journal, its leather cover cracked and stained. "Look at this," Alex said, picking it up. The others gathered around as he opened it. The journal was filled with frantic scrawls, the handwriting growing more erratic with each page. It detailed the experiences of someone who had been trapped in Craymore decades ago. The entries described strange occurrences, shadows moving on their own, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and a feeling of being constantly watched. The final entry read, "The town is alive. It feeds on us. There's no escape. If you're reading this, you're already too late." Maya let out a small gasp, stepping back. "This can't be real. It's just someone's sick idea of a joke." "Then where's the person who wrote this?" Sam asked, his voice cracking. "Where's anyone?" Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered, plunging the diner into momentary darkness. When they came back on, a shadow stood at the far end of the room, too tall and too still to be human. "What the hell is that?" Jordan whispered, backing away. The shadow didn't move, but its presence was suffocating, as though the very air around them had thickened. Alex grabbed a metal spatula from the counter, brandishing it like a weapon. "Stay together," he said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. The shadow dissolved into the floor, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. The group bolted out of the diner, their panic driving them into the streets of Craymore. The town was even more unsettling at night. The flickering streetlights cast long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and twist toward the group. The buildings loomed over them, their windows dark and yawning like empty sockets. "Where do we go?" Maya asked, tears streaming down her face. "There's got to be a way out," Alex said, scanning the streets. "We'll find it." They headed toward what appeared to be the town square, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. In the center of the square stood a decrepit statue of a man holding a lantern. Its face was worn and featureless, but its posture seemed almost accusatory, as if blaming them for being there. "What is this place?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just abandoned," Maya said. "It's wrong. Everything here feels alive." As they stood in the square, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder and more distinct, circling the group like an unseen predator. "They're coming," Jordan said, his voice shaking. "Who's coming?" Maya asked, her eyes darting around. The answer came in the form of figures emerging from the shadows. They were humanoid but distorted, their limbs too long and their faces blank. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, their heads tilting at odd angles, as if studying the group. "Run!" Alex shouted. They sprinted down a side street, the figures following in eerie silence. The group burst into a small church, slamming the heavy wooden doors behind them. The interior was just as decayed as the rest of the town, with pews rotting and cobwebs draping the altar. "What do we do now?" Sam asked, panting. "We wait," Alex said, his back against the door. "Maybe they'll go away." But the figures didn't leave. Through the stained glass windows, the group could see them standing motionless outside, their heads tilted as though listening. "What are they waiting for?" Maya whispered. "I don't think they're waiting," Jordan said, pointing to the shadows creeping along the walls. "I think they're already here." The group huddled together as the shadows moved closer, their forms stretching and morphing into grotesque shapes. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into guttural growls. "Alex, what do we do?" Maya asked, clutching his arm. "We fight," Alex said, though his voice lacked conviction. He grabbed a broken piece of wood from a nearby pew, brandishing it like a club. The others followed suit, arming themselves with whatever they could find. The first shadow lunged, and Alex swung the wood, passing straight through it. The shadow recoiled, but didn't dissipate, its form reforming as it advanced again. "They're not real," Sam said, backing away. "They're not real, but they can hurt us." The group retreated toward the altar, their makeshift weapons useless against the encroaching darkness. The whispers grew, deafening, and the room seemed to close in around them. Maya spotted a trapdoor behind the altar. "There," she shouted. Without hesitation, they pried it open and climbed down into the darkness below, the shadows clawing at their heels. As the door slammed shut above them, the whispers stopped, leaving them in silence once more. The group huddled together in the pitch-black tunnel, their breaths ragged. "What now?" Sam asked. Alex turned on his flashlight, illuminating a narrow corridor that stretched endlessly ahead. "We keep moving," he said. "Whatever this place is, it's not done with us yet." The air in the underground tunnel was damp and suffocating, carrying the metallic tang of rust and decay. Alex led the way, his flashlight casting shaky beams of light against the slimy walls. The group moved in tense silence, their footsteps echoing unervingly in the narrow space. "What is this place?" Maya whispered, clinging to Alex's arm. "It's like a sewer or something," Sam replied, though his voice lacked confidence. "No," Jordan said, his voice hushed but firm. "This isn't just a tunnel. Look at the walls." They all paused to examine the markings on the walls. Strange, intricate carvings lined the surface, symbols and patterns that seemed ancient, pulsating faintly as if alive. "These symbols, they're not random," Maya said, running her fingers along the grooves. "They're warnings." "Warnings or something worse," Alex muttered, his unease growing. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, echoing down the corridor like a ghostly chorus. They were louder now, closer, filling the space with a menacing rhythm that made it hard to think. "We need to keep moving," Alex said, his voice tight. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in impossible ways. The air grew colder with each step, their breaths visible in the flashlight's beam. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted. The group stumbled as the floor began to pulse, the vibrations growing stronger. "What the hell is that?" Sam shouted, steadying himself against the wall. "It's the town," Jordan said, his eyes wide with fear. "It's alive, just like the journal said." The tunnel widened into a cavernous chamber. The ceiling was impossibly high, disappearing into darkness, and the walls were covered in the same glowing symbols. At the center of the room was a massive pit, from which a sickly green light emanated, casting grotesque shadows across the group's faces. "What is this?" Maya asked, her voice barely audible. Alex stepped closer to the pit, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Inside, the green glow illuminated writhing shapes, faces contorted in agony, hands clawing upward as if trying to escape. "They're people," Alex said, his voice cracking. "They're trapped." The ground around the pit began to tremble, and a low, guttural growl reverberated through the chamber. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, their light pulsating in time with the whispers. "We shouldn't be here," Sam said, backing away from the pit. "We need to leave. Now." As if in response, the shadows in the cavern began to move. They peeled away from the walls, coalescing into humanoid shapes with glowing red eyes and jagged, claw-like hands. "They're coming," Jordan shouted, grabbing a piece of loose rock from the ground. The group scattered, the shadows lunging at them with unnatural speed. Alex swung his flashlight at one, but it passed through the creature harmlessly. "They're not physical," Maya screamed, dodging another shadow. "Then how do we fight them?" Sam yelled, barely evading a swipe from one of the shadowy claws. Alex's flashlight flickered and went out, plunging them into near-total darkness. The only light came from the glowing symbols and the green pit, which seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Maya grabbed Alex's arm. "We can't fight them. We have to find another way out." "Over there," Jordan shouted, pointing to an opening on the far side of the cavern. The group sprinted toward the opening, dodging the shadows that reached for them. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers became a deafening roar. As they reached the tunnel, Alex glanced back. The shadows weren't following. Instead, they circled the pit, their forms writhing in unison as if part of some dark ritual. "What are they doing?" Alex muttered. "I don't care," Sam said, dragging him forward. "Let's just go." The new tunnel was narrower and steeper, forcing them to climb over jagged rocks and duck under low-hanging beams. The walls were covered in more carvings, but these were different. Depictions of people being swallowed by the forest, their faces frozen in terror. "This place was never just a town," Jordan said, his voice shaky. "It's a trap, a feeding ground." Maya stopped suddenly, her breath hitching. "Do you hear that?" The others paused, straining to listen. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic chanting. It was coming from ahead. "We can't go back," Alex said, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. "We have to keep going." The group pressed on, the chanting growing louder and more menacing. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller, but equally unsettling. At its center stood a stone altar, covered in dark stains that reeked of iron. Behind the altar stood a figure, cloaked and hooded, its face obscured. It raised its arms, and the chanting ceased. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice echoing unnaturally. The group froze, fear paralyzing them. "What do you want?" Alex managed to ask, his voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, as though amused. "You." The figure's words hung in the air like a death knell. The group stood frozen, their breath shallow and ragged as the hooded figure descended from the altar. Its movements were slow and deliberate, each step echoing like a hammer, driving nails into a coffin. "What do you mean us?" Maya whispered, clutching Alex's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. "You fed the town by being here," the figure said, its voice hollow and layered, as if multiple entities were speaking at once. "But to sustain it, a sacrifice must be made." "We're not sacrificing anyone," Alex shouted, stepping in front of the group. His voice shook, but he forced himself to stand tall. The figure raised a skeletal hand, and the shadows slithered into the room like living smoke, encircling the group. Their red eyes glowed menacingly as the air grew impossibly cold. "You don't have a choice," the figure hissed. "One must stay, or none of you will leave." The group's panic swelled. The whispers returned, louder and more insidious, crawling into their minds and igniting their deepest fears. Maya began to sob, her hands trembling. Jordan backed away, shaking his head in disbelief. "We can't do this," Sam muttered, his voice barely audible. "We have to find another way." "There is no other way," the figure said, as if reading their thoughts. "The town demands its due." Alex's mind raced, desperate for a solution. His flashlight flickered weakly, illuminating the carvings on the walls. One symbol caught his eye, a circle surrounded by jagged lines, with a figure standing at its center. "It's a ritual," Alex said, his voice breaking through the chaos. "That's what this is. It's how the town stays alive. And how we stop it." Maya asked, her voice cracking. "We break the circle," Alex said, pointing to the altar. "If we destroy it, maybe we can stop the ritual." Before anyone could respond, the shadows lunged. Chaos erupted as the group fought to reach the altar. Alex grabbed a loose rock and brought it down on the stone, shattering it into pieces. The figure let out a deafening, inhuman scream as the room began to collapse. The group scrambled toward the tunnel as the walls crumbled around them. They didn't stop running until they burst into the forest, gasping for air. But the forest still whispered,